George Miller took the world by storm with Mad Max: Fury Road in 2015, all the longtime fans of the franchise were left second-guessing about how Tom Hardy's Mac Rokitansky fits in with Mel Gibson's Mad Max trilogy. While Fury Road did hit us like a freight train by proving that the franchise still could establish its relevance with the modern audience, I think Miller's beautifully wild brain is the one we should thank. Although Fury Road is known for its insanely wonderful appeal, the film spent quite a lot of time in development hell. Eventually, as time passed, Miller began envisioning the film as a more direct sequel to Mel Gibson's trilogy, but that was before he started making one story change after another, to a point that production was significantly delayed. Later, Max Rokitansky's character had to be recast, with Tom Hardy taking up the role, which of course had many significant implications for the film's continuity, low-key messing up the franchise's timeline as a whole. But even now, George Miller's Mad Max series is one of the biggest action movie franchises ever, combining intense car chases with a unique dystopian setting. While we follow the story of Max Rokitansky, a law enforcement officer who lost his sanity after his family was killed. Over time, it's become quite confusing how the reboot and the original trilogy fit into the same world, and that's exactly what we're here for. So without wasting another moment, let's get right to it. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
A burnt-out, desolate man. A man haunted by...
How is the backstory of Mel Gibson's Mad Max different from that of Tom Hardy's? The original Mad Max was released back in 1979 and is now considered an Australian classic. But what many of you don't know is how it was made on an extremely low budget. It basically relied on practical car stunts and a gritty grindhouse style, because Miller was running a shoestring funding, with most of it being his own personal investment. While the wasteland setting is now a hallmark of the Mad Max series, the first film is actually set in a kind of pre-apocalypse world, where Max, a police officer, goes rogue after a biker gang murders his family. The sequel, Mad Max: The Road Warrior, is arguably the best of the original trilogy, and it's the main reason why the Mad Max saga became a pop culture phenomenon. This film introduced the wasteland setting within the franchise, and went on to expand Max's motivations from a simple crusade for revenge to a broader quest for social justice. This theme further continued in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, where Max leads a group of children in a rebellion against an eccentric tyrant named Auntie-Entity. But through all these films, the backstory of Max Rokitansky is kept pretty vague, and even Fury Road doesn't give us much about Max's lore, apart from his hazy-ass hallucinations of all the people he failed to save. However, we do know some key details about his family history and his quest for revenge from the first 3 films. As you know, Max Rokitansky's story has been fleshed out across 4 main movies, and fans have always been curious about the reason that drives him to become the legendary road warrior we all know and love. Even if some details about his backstory are intentionally left unclear, I think we can still piece together a pretty good picture of Mad Max's lore. The main reason why we don't know much about Max Rokitansky's life before the apocalypse is because the Mad Max series doesn't really delve into that period, and instead focuses on a world that's dying. As you know, in the timeline of Mad Max, society starts falling apart even before the events of the first movie, although the main force patrol still maintains some form of law and order in rural Australia. However, between the events of the 1979 Mad Max and Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior, a World War III breaks out, which causes the true apocalypse and brings civilization to its very knees. In the initial phase of the Mad Max series, Max Rokitansky is an officer with the main force patrol in Australia, working alongside his partner Jim Goose. We see Max as one of the MFP's top officers, so much so that his boss tries to make him stay when he wants to leave later in the film. His work with the MFP had turned him into somewhat of a local celebrity, with his wife often pointing out that his success stories have been featured on TV several times, especially because of his actions against the roaming motorcycle gangs. While Max's career with the MFP is a huge part of his story before the apocalypse, we know a few other things about him too. In the first film, Max has a wife named Jessie and a young son, who he nicknamed Sprague. Max was seen to have a huge interest in cars, and spent a lot of time with his MFP friends working on various vehicles, including his iconic V8 Interceptor. Even though Max Rokitansky starts off in the Mad Max series as a fairly well-adjusted cop, his real story actually begins with the death of his partner, Jim Goose. Earlier in the film, Max takes down a fugitive called the Knight Rider in an intense car chase that ends with the Knight Rider crashing and dying. This death serves as a catalyst for Mad Max's first iconic villain, Toe Cutter, who was the leader of the Knight Rider's gang, to come to town seeking revenge. But before Toe Cutter can get to Max, he digs his nails into his partner, Jim Goose, in the most horrifying possible manner. While Goose was at a bar, another outlaw by the name of Johnny sabotaged his bike, which caused him to suffer a violent motorcycle accident. Later, Johnny throws something through Goose's car window, which makes him crash again. While Jim Goose was unconscious, Toe Cutter and Johnny then set the crashed car on fire, with him still alive inside. Later, Max finds Goose's charred body in the hospital, and even though he was alive, Goose had suffered third-degree burns and was in terrible shape. This event basically pushed Max to try and run away with his wife and child, which then led to the tragic events that transform him from Max to Mad Max. How did Mel Gibson's Max turn into Mad Max? After Max presumes that his partner Jim Goose had died, he practically hauls ass with his wife and their child to go on the run, trying to escape Toe Cutter's gang. However, Toe Cutter eventually catches up with them, after stalking them across Australia. Once he tracks them down, Toe Cutter's gang runs over Max's family with their bikes, killing them instantly. In the dying world, Max's wife and child were the only things that truly made him happy. So their grotesque deaths at Toe Cutter's hands served as the main catalyst that really set the Mad Max series in motion. Watching his wife and child get crushed by Toe Cutter and his gang shatters something inside Max, turning him into the Mad Max we're now so familiar with. After their deaths, Max becomes a hollow shell of the person he once used to be. As despair kicks in, Max is seen to eventually lose the side of him that still retained a sense of humor and tried to find joy in the little things in life. He turns into a man who's constantly plagued by the memories of his past and is haunted by the sadness of his loss. By the time Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior comes around, Max has become a completely different person, and although we see Max's character constantly developing over the course of the 4 films, he never returns to the person he was before, and only becomes more desolate as time goes on. Anyway, after losing his family, Mad Max swears to avenge his wife and son by hunting down each member of Toe Cutter's gang, almost driving himself mad with determination in order to make them pay for what they did. At first, Max engages in a fierce car chase with Toe Cutter, chasing the gang leader down the road until he dies in a head-on collision with another vehicle. Max then sets up a revenge plan for Johnny, handcuffing his legs to a car and rigging a delayed explosion in an attempt to force Johnny to cut off his own foot. Once Max settles the score with Toe Cutter's gang, he leaves home to head out into the wasteland, never looking back. Mad Max keeps fighting for what he thinks is right throughout the series, but it's never just out of a desire to help people. Instead, folks begin to hear about the legendary Road Warrior and seek his help, often offering essential things like gasoline in return. In Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior, we see the first time that Max embraces the role of a hero by assisting a group of survivors against Lord Humongous's gang of marauders. Since then, Max has carried on as a hero in the heart of Wasteland, with the Mad Max saga continuing to map his desolate life in a dying world. How did Mad Max Fury Road set itself as a reboot in the elaborate Mad Max continuity? Through its 40 years of existence, the Mad Max franchise has rarely stuck too closely to any strict continuity. Aside from the main protagonist, the wasteland backdrop, and the themes of rebellion, there aren't many recurring elements that tie the films tightly together. And as George Miller had once said in an interview, none of the films are really connected in any strict manner. According to him, each of the new Mad Max films are just another episode in an elaborate saga of a pretty archetypal character. Through Fury Road, we see Max as a bleak wanderer, searching for a sense of purpose in life, in the wasteland. That's exactly why you cannot put a chronological order on any of the Mad Max films, given that Miller never pinned them down thinking of a right way of continuity. Apparently, when Miller made the first Mad Max film in 1979, he had no clue there would be a second film. So ultimately, when the second film was made in 1981, he attempted to incorporate the things he could not do in the first film. And that's exactly why all Mad Max films should be seen as standalone films in many different ways. Personally, I think this mythic storytelling style that the Mad Max franchise has been following is extremely refreshing in today's world of heavily interconnected franchises. This allows Miller and his team to focus on bringing the best possible plot to our screens, without being tied down by a strict timeline or worrying about any broader narrative context that fits into the rigid Mad Max timeline. So this approach means you can actually watch movies in any order, making it much more accessible to the newcomers and the modern viewers of the franchise. I mean, yes, he definitely hides a good amount of Easter eggs here and there, but they're barely relevant or noticeable if you're a new fan. As you know, with any huge franchise, continuity resets are common because sticking too rigidly to canon can start to feel like constantly checking boxes, rather than being creatively driven. I mean, this is something we've often seen with both DC and Marvel Comics, where they introduce an in-canon event from time to time that resets the whole universe. This brings most characters back to their classic versions, making it easier for new readers to jump in and keep up. The same goes for Doctor Who on TV, as it resets things now and then to keep the stories relatable, because otherwise alien invasions would be seen as a very common earthly occurrence. Luckily, some franchises have finally understood the potential behind telling more standalone stories, with Joker, Logan, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse being some great examples, as they all use familiar elements from their source material but are not necessarily stuck to the strict continuity aspect like Mad Max. So while the derivative concept of a post-apocalyptic world set on a barren, harsh desert without basic human resources is something that both Mel Gibson's Mad Max and Tom Hardy's Mad Max share, they both are standalone essences of the same character trying to navigate his life, haunted by people he couldn't save, or the life that he's forced to lead. But with Mad Max Wasteland being in the pre-production era, I'm honestly very hopeful about the future of this franchise. While I'm sure we'll never see the same storyline followed by the first trilogy, the fifth installment in the franchise is rumored to set itself before the action of Fury Road. But I guess until it goes into production, we'll all keep second-guessing the entire thing. With that being said, which iteration of Mad Max is your favorite? Let us know in the comment box below. And if you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!